Welcome. Tonight, let your mind drift. In this quiet space, far from the noise of the day, we invite you to rest. These are stories from simpler times, of quiet gardens, turning wheels, and the warmth of glowing forges. Let each word guide you towards stillness, and each breath carry you deeper into sleep. You're safe here. You're home. And sleep is near. Let us begin. The garden that waited. At the edge of a forgotten road, where the trees bowed low and time seemed to hush its breath, there stood the ruins of an old stone abbey. Cracked walls leaned against ivy-covered arches, and moss pooled in the crevices like silent water. Beyond the gate, where most saw only rubble and memory, a garden stretched outward, delicate, sprawling, and deeply alive. It was tended by an old woman named Merwin. No one remembered when she had come. Some said she'd always been there. Others claimed she arrived with the spring mist decades ago, carrying a satchel of seeds and eyes that held too much silence. She never spoke of the past. Instead, she planted. Each morning, Merwin moved through the garden like a memory, soft, slow, and certain. She carried no tools save her hands, gnarled and strong, and a wooden trowel carved with runes worn smooth. The garden did not offer instant beauty. There were no grand blooms in bright defiance of the seasons. No manicured rose or bursts of color to catch a passerby's eye. Instead, the soil breathed slowly. Each seed tucked in like a whisper, left to dream beneath the surface. Some of the flowers Merwin planted would take 5 years to bloom. Some 10. One, the moonfern, took 13. She did not mind. She had time. Travelers passed through the road from time to time. Some seeking rest. Some merely lost. One spring, a soldier stopped by the low stone wall that bordered the garden. His boots were caked in old mud and newer blood. His face was young, but his eyes were not. Merwin was kneeling among the sleeping poppies. "These seeds," she said without looking up, "will not bloom for several years." The soldier frowned. Then why bother? Merwin stood slowly, brushing dirt from her palms. "Because I will still be here." He shook his head. "You could die before they bloom." "I could," she agreed. "But they will still bloom." He stayed 3 days. Said little. Slept among the rosemary and night sage. On the 4th morning, he left with a pressed moonfern leaf in his coat pocket. He didn't say goodbye. Merwin didn't need him to. The seasons moved slowly, as if the garden bent time. Each year brought changes so small, most would miss them. A new bud here. A vine curling a little higher there. But Merwin saw them all. She tended more than soil. She tended sorrow, regret, and memory. One autumn, a woman arrived with hands wrapped in cloth and eyes red from weeping. She never gave her name. Just sat by the lavender for days, staring into the wind. Merwin offered her warm broth and silence. By the 7th day, the woman asked, "Why doesn't anything grow quickly here?" Merwin smiled gently. "Because pain doesn't heal quickly either." The woman stayed the winter. Learned to prune with care. Learned that warmth returns, even after long frost. She left in the spring, barefoot and strong. Some thought the garden enchanted. Not because it sparkled or sang, but because it waited. Patiently. Without complaint. It welcomed the broken, the lost, the tired. And it gave them time. A young boy arrived with no words, only wide eyes and a broken music box. Merwin let him water the basil. He stayed for a summer. Spoke his first words beside the foxglove. An old scholar came with scrolls and questions. He left them all unanswered after watching a single seedling grow for a week. "I have studied truth," he said, "but never understood it." He left with dirt under his nails and a smile on his lips. One day, Merwin grew tired. Not all at once, but slowly, like dusk. She began to move more slowly than usual. Her breaths shallower, but her eyes stayed clear. Her hands steady. She sat by the oldest tree in the garden, the one she had planted first. Its roots deep, its branches wide enough to carry the sky. And there she waited. Not for death, but for bloom. One morning, as mist curled over the low stones, a soft sound rose in the air. Bloom. Everywhere. The moon ferns opened. The poppies shimmered. Even the stone rose, Merwin's oldest, slowest flower, blossomed with impossible color. Travelers stopped and stared. Bees buzzed like tiny bells. Birds filled the trees with hymn-like song. And in the center of it all, Merwin smiled. She passed quietly beneath the flowering tree. No one mourned loudly. The garden did not weep. It bloomed. In memory. In gratitude. In patience. Years passed. A woman with flame-red hair now tended the garden. She once wrapped her hands in cloth. Now she planted confidently. A boy, no longer a boy, built benches beneath the trees. Repaired the abbey's bell with silver. A new soldier stopped once, bitter and bruised. Sat by the lilies and asked, "What is this place?" The woman answered, "A garden that waited. And still waits. Not just for time, but for hearts ready to slow. To rest. To heal. Because in this garden, beauty does not rush. It roots itself deep. Waits through storms. And blooms when it's ready." Village Blacksmith Story. The morning in Ravensford began not with birdsong, nor with the rising sun, but with the hammer. Clang. 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 Each strike rang out over cobbled streets and timber-framed homes, stirring crows from the steeple and children from their beds. It was the hour before dawn. The sky was still inked in navy blue, and the village lay draped in mist. But the forge was already alive. Inside, fire pulsed within the heart of a stone hearth, its heat licking upward like a beast hungry for breath. Sparks danced like stars above the anvil. And behind the flame stood a man, broad of shoulder, soot-darkened, and steady as an oak. His name was Aldrich Wolfson, and he was the blacksmith of Ravensford. Aldrich had risen before the rooster. He always did. The fire had to be coaxed awake, and the metal warmed just so. He worked with rhythm, not haste. His arms moved like bellows, controlled, powerful. Each hammer blow deliberate. Each twist of the tongs guided by years of muscle memory. He didn't think in words when he worked. He thought in weight, shape, heat, and time. His forge was part of the village square. The stone structure leaned slightly, as if tired from years of leaning into the wind. It smelled of ash and iron, horses and oil. But to Aldrich, it was the scent of life. The forge had been his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of hammers, and the same fire still burned, fed every day with care and memory. By the time the sun crested over the trees, the village had begun to stir. A baker's boy ran past with a basket of rolls. An old woman paused to warm her hands near the forge's edge. A farmer arrived, holding up a broken plowshare with a grimace. Aldrich did not speak much, but he always nodded. He greeted people with his work. The forge was where needs were answered. Horseshoes for travel. Nails for builders. Hinges for doors. And when the times darkened, blades for soldiers. Aldrich made them all. He stood now with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms braided with soot and old scars. The iron bar on the anvil glowed red, soft as wax, waiting to become something. Anything. A tool. A weapon. A promise. Aldrich raised his hammer. And struck. The work never truly stopped. Not in a place like Ravensford. The village may have seemed quaint to a stranger. A scattering of thatched roofs, one stone church, and a market that opened only twice a week. But it breathed through Aldrich's forge. Every hinge that creaked open on the cooper's barrels. Every latch on a wooden gate. Every rivet in a wagon wheel. Aldrich's hand had touched them. His tools were many. Tongs of varied shape hung from blackened wooden beams. Hammers both round-faced and flat, heavy and fine. Files for smoothing, chisels for cutting, punches for shaping. Each had its place. And Aldrich knew them like a captain knew the stars. The bellows was the oldest piece in the shop, a great leather lung mounted beside the hearth. He pulled it with a practiced rhythm, feeding the flame with air and will. The coals flared white-hot. Aldrich's first task of the morning was simple: 6 new horseshoes. The stablemaster, Master Corbin, needed them by sundown. There'd been news of a messenger riding south, and his steed had thrown a shoe. Aldrich set to work without a word. Iron bars were drawn from the rack, each one thick as a thumb. Heated, bent, shaped over the anvil's horn. Holes punched through for nails. The ring of steel echoed as the horseshoes took form. By midday, the shoes were done. Still warm, still smelling of fire. Corbin would send a boy to fetch them. Aldrich washed his arms in the barrel out back, the water turning grey with ash and sweat. Then came the next order. A pair of shears for the wool merchant. A latch for the chapel door. And always nails. Nails by the dozen. No one ever had enough. Children often watched him from a distance. They'd sit on the low stone wall beside the square, eyes wide as the sparks flew. One boy, Thalen, had begun sweeping the floor in exchange for copper pennies. Aldrich said little, but he left an old pair of gloves for the boy to grow into. The forge breathed with life, and Aldrich gave it his breath. His work was his purpose. His days, defined by the dance of flame and steel. And though it was hard, and though it was endless, he never wished for another life. Because with each strike, he forged more than iron. He forged the rhythm of Ravensford. One autumn morning, as the mist hung low and bronze leaves twirled through the square, a rider approached the forge. His coat was travel-worn, his boots crusted with dust. A long sword hung at his side, dulled but clearly of fine make. He dismounted without a word, unbuckled the blade, and held it out to Aldrich. "Can this be saved?" he asked, his voice gravel-thick. Aldrich took the sword, turning it over in his hands. The hilt was cracked, the fuller warped slightly, and the edge bore notches deep enough to tell stories of battle. "Aye, it can," Aldrich replied. "But not quickly. It'll need days, maybe a week." He met the man's eyes. "You'll be needing patience." The rider nodded once. "I have time." So Aldrich set the sword aside and added it to the rhythm of his forge. That week, iron was tempered with silence and steel was shaped with care. The sword slowly returned to life, reborn not just by heat and hammer, but by the stillness between blows. When the rider returned, he said little. Only bowed his head and pressed a silver coin into Aldrich's palm. He rode off into the mist, his blade once more true. Not every visitor was a soldier. There were tinkerers who brought broken locks, carpenters who begged for new saw teeth, and once, even a stonemason who needed a chisel so precise, it took Aldrich 3 days to shape the point. Each task was different, but each carried the same weight. A trust. A responsibility. Winter was the hardest. The cold turned breath to frost and dulled the bones. Yet the forge still burned. Horses needed shoeing. Shovels snapped on frozen earth. Hinges rusted in the snow-laden winds. Aldrich's beard grew thick, his knuckles cracked and bled. But he endured. Because fire was life. And through fire, he gave life back to the village. He found, in the rhythm of steel, a quiet joy. A heartbeat. One that matched the sound of clanging iron and the steady whisper of coals. And so, the days passed. With sparks like stars. With smoke curling into the morning air. With the ring of Aldrich's hammer. A sound that meant home. Miller's Apprentice story. The first time Alric heard the mill turn, he was 5 years old. The grinding of the stones, the creak of the great wooden wheel, and the constant hush of the river, it all fused into a rhythm that never left him. To most, the mill was a place of work. To Alric, it was a heartbeat. His father, Master Garin, had been the village miller of Istmere since before Alric could walk. Broad and fair-bearded, with forearms like tree roots and eyes always squinting into flour dust, Garin was a man who commanded both respect and silence. He spoke rarely but worked endlessly. And to Alric, he was the world. At 7, Alric began sweeping the floors. At 9, he was allowed to help bag the ground wheat. By 12, he was guiding donkeys up the mill path, their backs heavy with sacks. But the work he truly loved was at the heart of the mill, adjusting the stones, feeling the grind, knowing by sound and pressure when the grain was right. It was a dance between earth and hands. The village depended on the mill. Each family brought their grain, their rye, their barley. Flour fed the town, and the town fed the trade routes. Garin never let Alric forget the weight of the work. "This stone breaks more than wheat," he'd say, tightening a bolt with calloused fingers. "It breaks laziness. It grinds a boy into a man." And so Alric worked. Through the spring floods, when the river swelled and threatened to drown the wheel. Through dry summers, when the mill slowed and tempers flared. Through autumn harvests that brought days without sleep. But the worst came in the winter of his 16th year. The river froze solid. The wheel stopped. And with it, so did the village's bread. Garin took ill soon after. A chill in the bones that grew worse by the week. By the time the thaw came, it was Alric alone who cranked the mill to life. He worked from dawn till dusk, and then into candlelight. Alone, he managed the sacks, the wheel, the grindstone. His hands bled. His back ached. But still he turned the grain. He bartered for firewood when coin ran low. He mended leaking roof tiles with tar and cloth. He fed the workhorses with grain too coarse to mill. He did not complain. When the flour finally returned to the village tables, the people came not with cheers, but with quiet nods. That was their way. And Alric, now taller, leaner, and dust-covered as his father had once been, nodded back. One night, Garin, frail beneath his woolen blankets, took Alric's hand. "You've earned your name, boy. Not just my son. My apprentice no more. You're the miller now." Alric didn't answer. He simply held his father's hand until the old man slept. Years passed. The mill turned. And with it, life in Istmere. Alric built new wheels when the old cracked. Reinforced the stone arches. Installed a chute to save the children from hauling sacks over their backs. He took on his own apprentice, a quiet girl named Marine who knew grain the way others knew song. She had nimble fingers and an unerring sense for moisture and texture. In time, she could tell barley from oat blindfolded, just by scent. He taught her the feel of it, the rhythm, the humility. He told her, one spring morning as the wheel groaned to life after frost, "This isn't just a trade. It's a promise. Between earth and bread. between hands and hunger. And she nodded. And the wheel turned. There were challenges. A flood that almost took the southern wall. A grain blight that threatened to ruin half the year's yield. And once, a thief who tried to rob the storeroom. But the mill stood. Alric stood. And slowly, the villagers stopped seeing a boy in flour and rags. They saw the miller. He kept a wooden carving his father had made. A simple figure of a wheel. Beside the hearth. On long nights, when the air froze thick and the stars seemed like stones in the sky, he'd sit by it and remember the old man's voice. In time, Alric's beard grew full. His hands lost their tremble. Marine ran more of the mill now, and Alric let her. He guided, he taught, and sometimes, he simply watched. He had no children of his own. But he had the river. He had the stone. He had a wheel that turned like time itself. As long as it did, Alric believed, the village would never be lost. Because flour meant food. And food meant hope. And in the steady hum of the mill, he found both. Even in old age, Alric could be found sitting on the stone ledge outside the mill, cloak wrapped tight, eyes on the water wheel. Children would come by to listen to his stories, not wild tales, but quiet ones, of grain and weather and the people who made the village whole. He'd point out a pattern in the flow of water, a trick to keep grain dry, or recall a harvest from decades before. And always, the wheel turned. When he finally passed, one winter evening beneath a sky soft with snow, Marine kept the mill running without pause. She hung his old apron beside the hearth and lit a lantern for him each night. Villagers said the flour was a little warmer after that. Because the river ran on. The stone turned. And the story of the miller's apprentice became the story of the miller himself. And so the garden waits. The forge cools. And the wheel turns on. May the echoes of these stories keep you company in your dreams, where time moves gently, and peace is easy to find. Sleep well, traveler. Until next time. Good night.